Hello, and welcome to the first in a series of panel discussions in which we bring together the subject matter experts from all of Kroll's specialties to discuss those common questions asked by our clients as they manage the threats involved with doing business in the current environment. Today, we're bringing together experts from our cybersecurity division and our security risk management division to speak on topics that are brought up by our clients as they prepare for the security-related risks associated with returning to the workspaces. Matthew Dunn is an Associate Managing Director in Kroll's Cyber Risk Practice. He joined Kroll in 2018 after retiring from the Federal Bureau of Investigations. During his 21-year career with the FBI, he conducted investigations ranging from drug trafficking to counterterrorism. During the last 3 years of his career, he supervised the FBI's Cyber and Counterintelligence Squad in Nashville, Tennessee. Matt Dumpert is an Associate Managing Director in Kroll's Security Risk Management Practice and has been with the firm for 3.5 years. Prior to joining Kroll, he had a distinguished career as a special agent with the State Department's Bureau of Diplomatic Security. Matt spearheads Kroll's threat management, executive protection, travel security, and other operational security offerings. So, let's go ahead and bring the Matts in and get right to those questions. Welcome, gentlemen. Good to see you. I hope we get some great questions for you today.
Great, thanks. Appreciate being here.
Good deal.
Good to be here. Thank you.
All right. Our first question is actually for our cyber expert, and it's a pretty big question. We hear this quite often. How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the cybersecurity threat environment?
Well, thanks, Jeff. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, unfortunately, we've seen a significant increase in the number of cybersecurity incidents that have impacted companies across all industry verticals. This is fairly typical during crisis situations. We see criminals take advantage of the situation for financial gain. And during this current crisis, we've seen cyber criminals using a variety of different type of phishing emails that are COVID-19 related to try to conduct criminal activities. So we've seen phishing emails that have subject lines or references within the email to things like CDC guidelines or World Health Organization vaccine research or coronavirus travel restrictions. And in the past several weeks, because of the high unemployment numbers, we've seen phishing emails with references to job opportunities and even stimulus checks. And all of these phishing emails appear to be coming from legitimate sources. What the cyber criminals are doing is they're trying to steal credentials. They're trying to get you to click on a link or open up an attachment that's embedded with malware within that email so they can steal credentials and gain unauthorized access to your accounts and then to your network to steal things like financial data, intellectual property, business trade secrets, and other types of sensitive data like personally identifiable information or even private healthcare information that has value to other cyber criminals operating on the dark web. But additionally, the cyber criminals are utilizing these phishing emails to try to download malware onto networks. Malware such as ransomware or banking trojans that can have a significant financial impact on a company's ability to conduct operations, especially with ransomware, if a network's files and data have all been encrypted. But one of the other things that we've seen during this COVID-19 crisis is cyber criminals taking advantage of a situation where companies had to mobilize their entire workforce to a remote work from home situation. And especially for companies that didn't have enough corporate issued devices to give to their employees, which forced employees to use their own personal devices to gain access to the corporate network to continue to do business. There's all kind of risk that could potentially be introduced with this scenario when you have individuals using a personal device that could have malware on it, and now they're trying to gain access to the corporate network, potentially moving that malware to the network. And especially we have seen cyber criminals taking advantage of the remote access platforms that are out there now, especially outdated remote desktop protocols or maybe virtual private networks, VPNs that are unpatched or that are not using two-factor authentication The cyber criminals are taking advantage of these vulnerabilities to gain access to those corporate networks for them to conduct additional criminal activity.
Excellent stuff. It's something that we all need to be aware of because obviously even we have seen a lot of these phishing attacks try to come at us here at Kroll. So it's very interesting to hear how that's impacted and what the COVID-19 pandemic might have even seen some increases in those phishing attacks. It looks like the next question happens to be for you as well, so you don't even get a break. But how about what should companies do to reduce the vulnerabilities for those that are still continuing to work from home?
Yeah, and there's a lot of companies that have, even though things have been lifted, with a lot of states going to different phases with their COVID-19 restrictions, a lot of companies are still maintaining those work from home scenarios. And so there's definitely some security measures that can be implemented. And here's some of the recommendations that I would make. For individuals that are continuing to work from home, I would mandate that you force them to work through a VPN, through that virtual private network. That's going to create that encrypted tunnel of communication between their devices and the corporate network. Must enforce that employees use complex passwords to gain access to the network. Too many times we've seen cyber attacks be successful because people are using simple passwords still that can easily be brute forced, or they're reusing the same password across multiple platforms. And as we all know, over the years, there's been thousands and thousands of data breaches, which has led to the compromise of credentials. And bad guys go onto dark web forums, purchase these credentials, and then they can apply them to a variety of different networks and platforms to get access into your corporate network to steal data. Some of the other things that I would recommend, force two-factor authentication on a lot of your platforms, especially to gain access to the network remotely. So have it put in place for your virtual private networks. Have it put in place if you can access your email from outside of the network, or even for certain databases that contain sensitive data. It's a great tool and another defense in depth that we suggest that you use. Some of the other things I would suggest is that maybe institute a policy of least privilege. If not anyone and not everyone in your company needs to have access to every database on your network, then maybe restrict those accesses to only things that they need to do their jobs. And that way, if those individuals have their accounts compromised, at least the cyber criminals will be limited in the amount of lateral movement they can do across your network and hopefully prevent them from gaining access to that sensitive data. Think about pushing patches, security patches out for your operating systems, as well as the software and third-party applications that you use. Cyber criminals know about vulnerabilities within these platforms and they target those. And if companies don't have the upgraded, security patches, then this is a way that we've seen cyber criminals gaining access to the network. If at all possible and if it's feasible, we suggest that companies provide their employees with corporate issued devices, which they can put additional security control measures on, and those are to be utilized just to access the corporate network for business purposes only. One of the other things I would recommend too is that you take a look at your incident response plan. During this COVID-19 crisis where now we have so many people that are working from home, is your incident response plan, updated so it can handle an incident if everybody has to respond remotely? It's a good time to try to run a tabletop exercise and do it remotely to test out the communication platforms that you would use if you needed to respond to an incident. So these are the things that we recommend for companies that are still allowing their employees to work from home during this crisis.
Interesting. It looks like the next one's actually for the other Matt. This is an operational security question. What are the top things to consider in threat management as we re-enter the office space?
So as we re-enter the office space, Jeff, one of the things we really need to consider, and it's one of the underlying tenets of threat management, is that threats can come from anywhere. They can be received in an email, they can be overheard, they can be seen on social media, they can come through a written letter, a package delivered to the office, a direct threat from a subordinate, a colleague, or a supervisor. These are the types of threats we're talking about, those that manifest through people. And that's really what I want to stress here when it comes to reintegrating into a workforce. The new norm, as we've been calling it, is still unknown. We don't know what that's going to be for people. And we have to understand and realize and recognize in all of these cases that threat actors, when you boil it down, are people. People have ambitions, they have aspirations, goals, stressors, medical conditions, families, friends, and all of the things that impact us in our private life and our professional life sometimes influence a threat management case. All of our employees are entitled to a bad day. Red flag indicators of violence are generally tracked over time, and we look for patterns in behavior before somebody presents in violence. And it's important to understand that as these stress situations escalate, as pressures at work, pressures at home, pressures related to the COVID-19 virus, and a litany of other pressures that people are feeling right now, that can all present in a threat case. And even our best employees may act out in ways that we didn't expect. So really to highlight that threats can come from anywhere. We can learn of them by any various mechanism, but it's important to understand, at least in this world, that all of our threat actors are people and they need to be treated such. Our mitigation and intervention strategies have to be informed with that in mind. And we want to learn as much about these people as possible so that our strategies can be as informed as possible.
Excellent. And, I assume that the risk levels are increasing as we come back to the office. We're going to see a lot more of these threat incidents. There's a lot of stressors out there. People need to be prepared for it, and organizations need to have those threat management protocols in place. I do have another one for you that's, really, can you boil it down to one thing you'd want to convey to an organization that's experiencing a threat, how they're going to go about, responding?
Sure. One thing to keep in mind in a threat management case, recognizing that our threat actors, like we just talked about, are people, the goal should always be de-escalation. The goal should always be keeping the temperature down, trying to keep a lid on things, and keeping a situation from escalating unnecessarily or escalating without a plan in place. In trying to keep the temperature down, it's important to understand the types of phrases and words that we use in engaging with people. It's important to understand what is acting behind the scenes. If mental health or chemical or alcohol dependency may be a complicating factor, all of these things inform the way that we approach these types of situations. When I engage in a threat management case, I bring together a multidisciplinary team which includes forensic psychiatry, forensic psychology, behavioral assessment professionals, and really anybody else with a specialty that I need to weigh in, because our goal is always, always, always to keep the temperature down and not have things escalate as a result of what we do. Now, sometimes we do, for lack of a better term, whack the hornet's nest. But when we do that, it's very carefully choreographed. Physical security of all of those involved is carefully considered and planned for. And then lastly, really, is the understanding between a threat management case and a typical performance case in the workplace is that there's no trophy victory at the end of a threat management case. We're not looking for a courtroom style victory. We're not looking for monetary compensation. What we're doing is we're looking to mitigate the threat actor. We're looking to get them to stop whatever threatening behaviors they're engaged in. And what that does is it allows us a little bit of flexibility and a little bit more bandwidth to deal with the overall issues. So, long story short, de-escalation, keep the temperature down, recognize we're dealing with people, and when you need, reach out for expert guidance, like I talked about, forensic psychiatry, psychology, behavioral assessment professionals. Those types of specialties can really be of assistance.
Okay. Let's give one on the cyber side. Another question we've gotten, kind of ties into the last two ago for Matt, was what cybersecurity measures should be implemented for companies returning to their physical offices? What do we need to do to prepare to bring everybody back to the office on a cyber side?
Yeah, that's a great question. And now that a lot of states have lifted some of their COVID-19 restrictions, and they're in different phases of reopening businesses and bringing people back from that work from home scenarios back into their physical office spaces, there's definitely security measures that should be implemented to make sure that you're protected, from cyber criminals and to reduce your chances of falling victim to cyber crimes. One of the first things that I would recommend is to force a mandatory password reset. A lot of people have been, they've been working from home. They've been doing so on personal devices, and if there's a chance that there was malware on any of those devices, like a keystroke logger that may have recorded any passwords, you want to make sure that cyber criminals can't get access to those passwords where they can then log into the network. So do a forced mandatory password reset. One of the other things that I would recommend is to disable any local administrative rights that may have been provided during the work from home scenarios. Since companies were forced to push people to work from home so quickly, a lot of them needed to do upgrades on whether it's their personal devices or even company issued laptops for certain software applications that they needed, or maybe upgrades to some of those platforms in order for them to do the job. And so to do that remotely, a lot of the IT shops wound up providing these employees with local administrative rights to do those necessary applications. Now that they're back into the physical office site and they're back to utilizing the corporate computers, they're probably going to need those local admin rights. And there's a big risk with people that have administrative rights, because if a cyber criminal is able to compromise the account of an employee that has administrative rights, then it gives them a lot more freedom to move laterally throughout the network and potentially access some of those databases that have sensitive data, which could be crippling to a corporation. So I would definitely recommend disabling those. Some of the other things that you may want to think about doing is reducing the number of license upgrades that may have been provided during this time. All of a sudden, we had a large amount of people that needed to have access to video conferencing software. And maybe we provided them with upgraded licenses that they're no longer going to need now that they can meet in person in the office. The company can save itself some money, so revoke some of those licenses. But some of the other things you may want to think about doing right off the bat is a network scan, to take a look and see if there are any unauthorized or unknown devices that are connected to the network or are trying to connect to the network. But you can also see if there's unwanted software that may be trying to operate or execute on the network. These are things that think about utilizing, like an endpoint monitoring solution that's going to monitor all the endpoints and provide you with alerts if they're seeing suspicious activity on those endpoints. Some of the other things that we may want to think about is not to allow personal devices to connect to the corporate network, because we don't know what type of malware that they may have picked up while we were working from home. And along those lines, you may want to think about disabling any USB drives, thumb drives or flash drives, or personal storage devices from connecting to those corporate devices. Now, we understand that during work from home, a lot of people may have not had the necessary memory capacity to do their work, so they needed to use these external drives, but we don't know what else they may have been used for and what other malware may be on them, so we don't want to have them introduced into corporate devices inside to be able to spread malware into the network. Some of the other things you may want to think about, again, is looking at that incident response plan and identifying issues that may have come up that you recognized when everyone was working remotely, and now think about the lessons learned during this time, because we may need to adjust some of the incident response plan strategies that we had if we are forced to go back into an extended work from home scenario, whether it's due to an uptick in COVID-19 infections or some other type of crisis. So during this recent pandemic, it's allowed companies to kind of take a look at what plans that they have, whether it's business continuity or cyber-rated incident response plans, to determine if they have the right protocols set in place to be able to respond, contain, and remediate these situations if they come up.
So I think that the next one, and I believe this is going to be our last question for this session, is going to go back to the operational side, and it ties in really well with one of the big items that Matthew Dumpert wanted to get expressed there with the de-escalation of threat. And this one is really what should companies do to mitigate potential escalations of threats? What kind of points can you give them to make sure that they're not doing things to actually escalate threats on how they're responding to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Lots of our partners and lots of our clients have some internal and organic capabilities to deal with what we call, quote unquote, threat actors. And, when you really boil it down, to determine if a threat is serious or is going to present in violence, there's a number of factors that play into it. We look at the history of the employee. We look at, demonstrated acts over time. We look for red flag indicators of violence. And really, to do that and to do it well, you need some expert guidance. And whether that's guidance or an internal capability that you build over time and train a fully functioning threat management team within your own organization. And we help our clients do this all the time. This is a team, a multidisciplinary team of people comprised of colleagues, legal and HR and security and marketing and all these different internal functions typically make up these teams. And what that does is it brings various perspectives, various life experiences, and various lenses to assessing whether something is a threat or whether it's a performance-based issue that can be dealt with established protocols. A lot of those exist within human resources. Some may exist within a security department. But when things start to get past the point of their training or experience, that's when it's really important to bring in a partner. Not only because you want to make sure you handle it properly and your strategy is as informed as possible and your mitigation techniques and efforts are not in vain, but also from a liability protection perspective. One thing that I've learned after doing threat management for a career, really, is no two cases are the same. Whether it's individuals threatening world leaders in my previous life or now threatening corporate executives, bosses, colleagues, high net worth individuals, no two cases are identical. No two threat actors, no two people are the same because the situation is always different. The individual is different. The stressors they have in their lives are different. So it's really important to understand what your internal capabilities are. Trust your human resources professionals, trust your legal counsel, trust your security department, but also know that, like in all other things, you may reach a point where you're starting to bump up against the growth edge of your training and experience, and that might be the time to seek expert assistance, because there's a community of people nationwide and worldwide that are collaborating on these things every day.
Excellent advice, Matthew. Well, I believe that wraps up the questions from this session. I want to take this opportunity to thank the two Matthews for the great advice they've given us. We hope you found this video interesting and informative. We also hope to see you on the next panel discussion, which will focus on our virtual outsourced security and crisis manager services. Thanks for watching.